last comment.
Monster Brawl?
We watched Monster Brawl, everyone. Monster Brawl was awesome. It was not so much a movie as it was a... this was a pay-per-view combat sport with monsters. They put together a card.
If you like, I could play the trailer.
I don't see why not.
I'm going to play the trailer for Monster Brawl.
50 seconds of it.
If this goddamn thing cuts off at 50 seconds, I'm going to be really mad. Here we go.
Video offers a rich and engaging way to connect with your audience and grow your business. And now, with...
Here we go. Stop it at 50. Infuriating. The preview is unrated.
They've been out there for centuries, lurking in the shadows, rotting in our stories and myths, and buried in our nightmares. For the time will come when monsters will shape the fortunes of all.
Good evening, monster fans in Canada, Newfoundland, and the United States of America.
Dave Foley, Art Hindle, Robert Maillet, Kevin Nash, Jimmy Hart, Herb Dean, Jason Brown, featuring Cyclops, the Mummy, Lady Vampire, Zombie Man, Witch Bitch, Swamp Gut, Werewolf, Frankenstein. 8 legendary monsters from around the world summoned to the ring to determine the most powerful monster of all time.
I'm gonna be late for the Monster Brawl!
It's the ultimate fight of the living dead.
He's gotta throw everything at this fat son of a bitch!
Monster Brawl.
Anyone who watches Monster Brawl is going home in a body bag.
Coming soon. Monster Brawl, everybody.
Monster Brawl. All right, yes. And that's the whole gimmick. They booked a card. There's going to be a bunch of fights, including a tournament, and that was it. So the movie opens with essentially the trailer you just heard. Then we cut to the announcers of the pay-per-view, one of whom was Dave Foley from News Radio and Kids in the Hall. He explains that there are 2 conferences, the Undead Conference and the Creatures Conference. They also have weight divisions, and there's going to be a cruiserweight battle in each conference and a heavyweight battle in each conference, and then the 2 heavyweight winners will meet in the championship. Don't ask me what happened to the cruiserweight winners. It's not important.
I couldn't figure out all of this.
It was very simple.
Well, I mean, what was the point of the divisions?
Just to lump the combatants into kind of our. So some of them are things that used to be alive and are now dead, and some of them are animals.
I see.
So in the undead division, for example, you had the Mummy, Zombie Man, Frankenstein, and Lady Vampire. And the creatures had Cyclops, Swamp Gut, Werewolf, and Witch Bitch.
Yes.
They did. I will say they did zoom through this very quickly. And if you're not taking notes like I did, and even with my notes, I was having trouble keeping up with them. They could have taken their time on this segment a little bit.
Now it doesn't matter because they did.
They explained it match by match.
Yes.
So they introduced Jimmy Hart as himself, who cut a promo about the whole deal. He said this was all started by a failed wrestling promoter. Then he interviewed the failed wrestling promoter, who is apparently the producer and director of this movie. Said, quote, "I've pretty much been a geek when it comes to monsters and wrestling." Jimmy was bored by all this and openly yawning. And he also said they could not afford a big arena, so they found an abandoned graveyard and held it here. The gravekeeper warned them it was a mistake to mess with this place. They'd released something evil. Herb Dean appeared in front of a green screen to explain the rules. They were few, but he's not a big fan of shots to the groin. He also announced, "I hate monsters more than anything." So it's time for the matches, and it's actually really great. They did like a 5-minute video on each monster's history and training methods and how they came to be and what motivates them. They showed Cyclops in Greece, where he was working as a blacksmith. He got a summons explaining that he had been challenged to a monster tournament.
A summons.
A summons, yes. A subpoena, perhaps.
Yeah.
And he explained that he could see the future and started training and throwing trees and rocks around and doing some shadow boxing. We went from there to Buzzard Bay, Massachusetts, where they have a witch. And people were spitting on her, and this made her mad. So a midget showed up at her door. And I understand that for some people that's an offensive term, but for this movie, this had to be a midget. It's going to be a dwarf or a little person. This was a midget. He explained that he was a bodyguard and a manager. And he, as best I could tell, he taught her how to box. And she beat up the man who spit on her with boxing gloves on. So it was Cyclops versus Witch Bitch. They did a tail of the tape. They cut promos on each other. The announcers said things like, he comes from a long line of one-eyed blacksmiths, and the loser must leave this world.
Die.
So they're having this... There's a ring, by the way, a ring in the graveyard.
Yeah, let me just explain to everybody when you listen to this. It sounds like we're describing an pay-per-view. This essentially is a wrestling pay-per-view with really good production values.
Yes.
And it's a film. It's I don't even know a mockumentary? What would you even call it?
That's not a bad...
I read a review of this where the guy who reviewed the film, who obviously reviewed a lot of horror films, he's like, it's a horror film, but it's not really scary. And it's like a wrestling card, but it's a movie. He goes, I don't even know what genre this would be. They may have created their own genre.
Yeah.
That's what this is. There's nothing like it. It's impossible to describe.
It's a fake sport that's even faker than the fake sport we watch every week.
It's an independent film, but it's actually very well done. It's very well done as far as it's a largely professionally produced film with. It's kind of funny because like the set is so ghetto.
Yeah.
But, like, obviously they threw a lot of money into this movie in some ways. In other ways, they didn't, which is part of its charm.
Yes.
But, yeah, so you're following it exactly like if you watched just imagine a film about UFC where everything is film. Like, the video packages are part of the film, which leads to the fight, which is part of the film. The whole thing is just part of the film, going in order like you're actually watching a pay-per-view.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
It was awesome. So they're having this match. And Cyclops is beating her up, and then she cuts him off with a low blow that the announcers refer to as, quote, a dirty kick to the dick.
Yes.
Herb Dean begins to scold her. As we mentioned, he does not like low blows. But then after this, Cyclops begins to hit her repeatedly with a hammer. Herb Dean was fine with this. And I thought this was unfair officiating on the part of the great Herb Dean.
Well, you got to follow the rules.
The rules are there's no nut shots.
You can rip a man's head open like King Kong and the dinosaur. You can disembowel, etc. But you can't kick someone in the dick.
You can't do a dirty kick to the dick.
Yeah.
So, Witch Bitch agreed with me this was not fair officiating. She then pulled out a weapon and sliced Herb Dean's throat. The announcer said Herb Dean has been murdered with a rusty cleaver.
Herb Dean dead.
Yeah.
Clearly he was available for one day.
They fought for a while, and finally Cyclops used the laser beam from his one eye to burn off her face and kill her. And then her midget manager, his name was the Grub, officially, which I think is even more offensive than midget. But he comes to attack Cyclops, and Cyclops punches his head off. Then, what's your pet peeve about UFC when they ask guys, who do you want to fight, and they say, I'll take anyone?
Yes.
Cyclops called out Hades. You're next, Hades. I'm coming for you. And then they cut to Jimmy Hart.
There was no Hades in this, was there?
Perhaps that's in the sequel.
I see.
He explained somewhere in here that he had lost one of his eyes in a deal gone bad with Hades. But Jimmy Hart replied, look at Herb Dean. Ha ha ha. He's dead.
Sad to see Herb go.
Time for the next fight. Show must go on, Brian.
Well,
even
course.
after one of the competitors has murdered Herb Dean with a rusty cleaver. They showed the mummy breaking out of a crate in a museum in New York. He killed a security guard, and then they showed the news report on this, which, first of all, they had a crawler on the screen, on the bottom of the screen, and if you actually read what's going on in the crawler, all of those were pertaining to other events, and all of those were talking about other events of other monsters in the movie. So that was awesome. But then the headline for this was "Mummy Kills Dummy," and then they talked to a professor or somebody who was searching for the mummy, and it was identified as a MILF, a mummy I'd like to find.
Yes. You laughed uproariously at this.
Well, many times, but that was particularly great. And then there's a guy in Transylvania who tried to find a vampire, and he found her, but she bit out his throat, and that was that. So, Lady Vampire versus the Mummy. They cut promos again. The Mummy's promo was, in fact, in hieroglyphics.
He didn't speak.
He grunted, but they put subtitles up, but the subtitles were in hieroglyphics.
Yes.
Yes. So, the Mummy and Lady Vampire began with a collar and elbow tie-up.
Mm-hmm.
This is essentially a pro wrestling match.
She could clearly work. She threw
I looked her up. She's because I actually for a brief second I thought it was Sarah Del Rey. It's not. She's a Toronto indie worker.
What's her name?
Oh, what the hell is her name? Look it up again. I had not heard of her before. But she looked good. There it is. Monster Brawl. Lady Vampire Kelly Couture. That's right.
Kelly Couture.
No relation. Not Randy's daughter or anything. So, they had a match. And the Mummy and Lady Vampire, the match was fine. The Mummy used a wooden stake to try and kill her. This failed, so he grabbed his magical amulet, which burned her with sunlight, but still failed to kill her. And finally, she made her comeback. She broke a tombstone over his head. She tore his heart out. I forgot to mention something here. One of the other stars of this movie was Lance Henriksen in voice only. He never appeared on camera. He just did some voiceover work. And specifically, he did all the narration. And also, I know you're not a huge video game guy, Brian, and frankly, neither am I, but I'm aware that in Mortal Kombat, for example, you will hear a phantom voice saying, "Fatality," or "Finish him." Well, Lance Henriksen did that for these fights. And so when she killed the Mummy by tearing out his heart, you heard Lance Henriksen say, "Lady Vampire wins via black heart removal." I love this movie. They announced that Lady Vampire would, quote, "return home to killing gypsies in the night." Next
Apparently
fight.
this Kelly Couture has had a lot of matches, including Four Corners match, 2008. Christy Hemme beats Gail Kim, Tracy Brooks, and Kelly Couture.
Well, there you go.
How about that? Oh my God. Bobby Roode and Tracy Brooks against Rhino and Kelly Couture. So she's had some matches.
Cut to New Jersey, where a guy and his apparently pregnant wife were on a camping trip, but then she was slaughtered, and he found out it was a werewolf. So he began to train and work out, and he went back to kill the werewolf, but the werewolf instead ate his face.
His face.
Turned him into a werewolf. He gave you a howl that you were not impressed with.
This would be like if when Miz tries to impersonate Ric Flair, we'll probably get a very similar sound coming out of his mouth. Wow! You're not impressed by my impersonation?
Oh, I'm impressed. I am impressed, let me tell you.
That hurt me.
We then had my favorite character, and it's not just because he's fat. Swamp Gut. His video piece was shot much like the nature documentary we just watched with the sea lion eating the octopus. It was like shot with cameras from afar as they explain his life cycle and diet and social habits. And he's basically Swamp Thing, except he has a lot of toxic, venomous gas in his gut that he then can spit up onto people and kill them. And his very touch was toxic and killed people, so this all made Swamp Gut very lonely.
Yeah.
It's a sad tale. And a fisherman accidentally caught him, and he began to reel him in, so Swamp Gut killed him. And then the guy was taking his canoe through the swamp, and swamp gut popped out of the water and killed him too. And then the announcer tells us that due to industrialization and mankind encroaching on the swamp gut's habitat and destroying it, there are under 10 swamp guts left in the world. It's very sad.
9 now.
Yeah. Werewolf versus swamp gut. Werewolf cut a promo in perfect English. Werewolf cut 2 promos in the show, and they were the best promos in the show. Swamp gut cut a promo that was all grunts and groans, but it was translated into English, and it was all about how we must protect the earth and watch out for the environment, and instead we were all polluting it, and ended with, God damn you all to hell.
It's not very nice, swamp gut.
They explained he was morbidly obese, and he had to overcome the drawback of his massive gut. So the werewolf shows up, and there were by the way, they didn't come out of the locker room. They had some guys coming out of the stone crypt, and some guys coming out of the wood crypt.
Yeah, the baby faces and heels.
I suppose.
Or undead and beasts.
Yeah, so he comes out of the crypt, and he does his lame... First he jumps down the stairs no farther than I would have jumped. Then he runs faster than I would have run. He did vault over the ropes. I will give him that. So...
Did he jump as high as the wolf jumped tonight when I threw that piece of paper and he leaped about 19 feet in the air?
Your cat, the wolf, jumped much higher than this guy. So, they had their match, and the swamp gut spat up his toxic spew onto Werewolf, but would not kill him and only caused him pain. And Werewolf fired up, and eventually he was just too fast for Swamp Gut to keep up with. And he hit a series of shots to the morbidly obese belly and knocked him down. And he hit a giant splash off the top rope, and Swamp Gut exploded.
Blew up!
Yeah. This counted as a loss.
You know, in out of respect for the wolf's win here, I got to tell a quick story about my wolf. We have a cat tube, and it was always, for some reason, like it was just leaning against the fireplace for like 2 months, and it ended up in the middle of the living room floor a couple days ago. I don't even know why. But once it was there, it was a brand new toy because it had moved. And so the wolf and Tiggy and Snork are now constantly fighting over this tube. It's new territory that needs to be won.
Yes, they are fighting.
Yeah.
I saw this.
You saw this vicious...
This is not playing. This is not grappling. This is fighting.
Well, they're playing. It's just Tiggy is like she's a bully, but the wolf takes no shit. And so the wolf attacks Tiggy, and Tiggy cries.
I see.
And she does the gimmick that the women do in WWE where you're trapped in the corner, you can't get away, and like Tiggy will be against a wall, and the wolf will be attacking her. And instead of running like right or left, she'll act like she's just trapped, and she'll go, ah! And like she wants, like I'm going to help her. But anyway, so they're all fighting over the tube, and I crumpled up a big ass piece of paper because Tiggy in particular loves to chase and play soccer, and if you throw the paper, she'll jump up and she'll catch it with her paws. So the wolf has now started to do this, and the wolf is a little smaller than Tiggy, and I always thought that Tiggy could jump super high, but holy shit, this wolf can jump. I mean, you didn't even see like the highest jump that this wolf has done. I mean, literally this cat jumps about, if you stretched it out, probably 4 times its own length.
Yeah.
Maybe even higher. Like, literally, I swear to God, this wolf jumped as high as my head the other day when I threw this piece of paper. And he can't see very well. They were born outside on our porch, and this one was like the Runt, as was its original name. And it was really small, and lucky it survived. But I think that like it just like something was wrong with its eyes, because it can see, but it can't track very well. And so you kind of got to be like right in front of it throwing this piece of paper. But the new gimmick is I throw this paper high, and the wolf jumps straight up in the air, like 4 times its own height, and with one paw, it smashes the paper and spikes it like a volleyball player. It's the craziest thing. But Tiggy will like jump in the air to catch the paper and then land on her feet because she's like a smart cat. But the wolf is like, he just throws caution to the wind, and now he will like jump up, the tube's underneath him, he'll leap up in the air and he'll spike it, but he forgets he's got to land on the ground, so he'll like land on his side on this little tube, which then flips him up into the air, and he does a flip and lands on the ground. And he just does this over and over again. But he's amazing, this wolf. I've never seen a cat jump this high. And he's tiny. He's like a year old. But he just jumps like a mother. And he jumped a hell of a lot better than the wolf man jumped on this particular show. Literally, as you noted, you would have done a better job jumping than the wolf man.
Jumping! I would have out-jumped this wolf.
Bobo, when recreating a Squatch, does a better job jumping and leaping than the wolf man in this film.
So we had one more first-round match. First, we saw in two soldiers, one of whom was played by Kevin Nash. Yes, that Kevin Nash. They revealed they had a monster locked up in a cage somewhere, and he was going to be their new secret weapon. But he was hungry, and there were no more bodies to feed him. So Kevin Nash shot his companion and fed him to the monster. Monster's name is Zombie Man.
Kevin Nash was the most ungodly, horrible actor in this film.
Yeah, this is not his strong
However, the final scene redeemed him in my eyes. We'll get to that.
I almost don't want to spoil the ending of this. It's too awesome, and I'd encourage you all to see this movie. But we're going to anyway, because that's what we do here. The final monster was just Frankenstein. They showed the exact same Frankenstein origin story you all know, only this was created by Dr. Igora for some reason. So they're starting doing the entrances for Frankenstein versus Zombie Man, and I must tell us some backstory here. Years and years and years ago on this program, before many of you were listening, the subject of Frankenstein came up, and I pointed out that there was a difference between Dr. Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. And this resulted in like a 10-minute argument about whether this was important or not. Have I done a fair job of describing this?
But the reality is it's not important.
Years later, I will concede that.
Okay.
So,
as long as we get that out of the way.
It's fine. So, Frankenstein is coming down the steps to the ring here, and the announcers say, and this again is a quote, technically, it's Frankenstein's monster if you want to be a dick about it. This has to have been a rib on me. This must have been. Someone involved in this movie listened to that show years ago and said, we're going to fuck with Vinny here.
Well,
and if so, well played.
The director is a wrestling fan.
Well played.
And a fan of monsters. And a fan of me, apparently.
So, yes, you had Frankenstein came out with Dr. Igora, and Kevin Nash as Colonel Crookshanks came out with Zombie Man. He was significantly taller than Zombie Man and also could barely go downstairs. So they're fighting, and as they pointed out, Frankenstein is himself kind of a zombie. Reanimated dead matter. Very hard to kill either of these men. And neither of the managers was satisfied with their fighter's performance. And Dr. Igora got in the ring and he hit Zombie with a wrench. This pissed off Colonel Crookshanks.
Good plan, by the way.
Yeah, hitting a zombie with a wrench, a proven method to do nothing. Crookshanks got in the ring. He killed the doctor with a hatchet. But Frankenstein saw this. And he Frankensteined up. And he freaked out. He whipped the zombie's ass. And he squished the zombie's head. And he won.
You want to know a funny story?
How long was the show?
It's not very long. It's actually about the zombie. So I was reading a review. We're only an hour in. I was reading a review, and as I'm reading it, they spoiled the whole goddamn movie.
All right, so it's us.
No, they talked about it, and they said at the end of the movie, the winner, and in the parentheses they put the zombie. I'm sitting there, and it's like, zombie's dead. And then I'm thinking, well, zombie's dead, but he's also undead.
Yeah.
So clearly in the movie, the zombie comes back. Didn't happen.
No.
This guy watched the entire movie, reviewed it, and didn't know who won the title. Hell of a review there, buddy.
There is a clip out there. Roger Ebert just posted a link to this. It's himself and Gene Siskel on the Letterman show from many, many years ago, obviously. And he was explaining that once the two of them and like 2 or 3 other reviewers were at a film festival, And of course, when you're a film critic and you watch like 6 movies a day, at times in the movie, during the movie, you have to leave to make a phone call or go to the bathroom, whatever. So they were watching some god-awful, boring, mundane Korean film, and Siskel left the room to make a phone call. And as soon as he left the room, one of the characters in this run-of-the-mill, mundane, nothing-going-on movie, she left the other characters to go have sexual relations with her poodle. And then Siskel returned to find the other critics all laughing hysterically. And he asked what happened, and they told him, and he said, no, she didn't. And so he had to write a review of this thing he had not seen. And so he simply said, some material may shock some viewers.
Yes.
It's a great story. All right, so Zombie's dead. Frankenstein has won. The lights go out in the graveyard. Lightning is storming, striking, crashing, whatever you call it. But then you recall the gravedigger mentioned that this was an evil place and they had violated it. And then it turns out the death of Zombie Man has caused all the other bodies in the graveyard to turn into zombies themselves. And they go after Frankenstein, and he roars at them, and they are scared, and so they leave. Frankenstein goes into the crypt. And so instead the zombies attack everyone else. They attack the announcers. They attack the gravedigger. They attack Kevin Nash, and they eat him. And then finally the gravedigger returns with a shotgun, and he kills them all. So now it's time for the championship match. Werewolf versus Frankenstein. Werewolf, in his second good promo of the show, explains that a monster killed his wife and baby, and so he is out for revenge against all monsters.
What a babyface.
Speaking of being a babyface, he did a Ric Flair howl, and then, yes, he did a better figure 4 leg lock than The Miz.
He did.
The Werewolf, everyone, has a better figure 4 leg lock than The Miz.
I was hoping he'd do the figure 4 and he'd break both legs. They would snap like twigs.
They may have. So there were many, many false finishes here where one guy left the other for dead, but then he got up in the background behind him. They kept fighting.
Basic monster movie.
Yeah. They swung a lot of cement things at each other, and eventually Frankenstein chokeslammed him. Oh, Frankenstein, by the way, for those of you who are big Truth Commission fans, this was Kurgan.
Yeah, Kurgan.
Kurgan the Interrogator here is Frankenstein.
I think he was better in this movie than he was in any of his matches.
I assure you. I went back and watched one just to see if he was as awful as I remembered. Yes, he was. So he chokeslams the werewolf, and then he tears his head in half. This does, in fact, finish him off. They presented him with a belt. He was the champion of all monsters, and he's about to leave and go into the crypt and do whatever champion monsters do. Go all night and go a little longer, I guess. But then the other crypt door swings open, and out steps Zombie Colonel Crookshanks.
Kevin Nash.
As a zombie. And he cries out, Frankenstein! And the two giant monsters have a stare down, and they are grunting and breathing at each other, much like John Heidenreich and Gene Snitsky, as we heard earlier. And then they rear back for a punch, and that's where the movie ends.
My favorite part, you completely undersold the grunting and groaning. They look at each other, and Frankenstein, who really can say nothing, goes, ah!
That's true. They both took turns doing a mighty battle roar.
That's the best part.
Yeah.
He'd been doing this roar through the entire movie. Frankenstein would just stop and he would roar. So he looks at Kevin Nash and he roars, and there's a pause, and Kevin Nash looks at him and then goes, ah! And then they rear back.
Yes.
Kevin Nash's roar at the end of this movie was when it peaked. That's when this movie peaked. This was I should put it this way. The movie's called Monster Brawl.
Yes.
And in this movie, there are a bunch of monsters, and they brawl.
Yes.
I saw some reviews that gave this movie like 2.5 stars out of 4. And I was like, what the hell were you expecting here? What were you expecting in this film? It was exactly as advertised. It was a monster brawl.
Yeah.
This movie was 5 stars.
Yes.
Like, Are there monster movie snobs that are like, well, this movie, the werewolf he did not fear the moonlight, or what is it about this movie that caused you to give it 2.5 stars instead of 4? I don't know. I'm not a movie critic. This movie is exactly as was delivered. Everyone performed their monstrous roles fine. It was meant to be campy and goofy, and it was a perfect film if you were going to make a film called Monster Brawl. And I'd like to add, Two-Headed Sand Shark, still the worst movie I've ever seen.
Two-Headed Shark Attack.
Two-Headed Shark Attack.
You keep combining the Brooke Hogan movies.
Two-Headed Sand Sharks?
Yeah.
Two-Headed Shark Attack is the worst movie I've ever seen.
Monster Brawl was miles and miles better than Sand Sharks, which was miles and miles better than Two-Headed Shark Attack. I love Monster Brawl. As noted, it made sense and was booked better than all wrestling. And for the sequel, they can just do another tournament, and then they also have a super fight with Frankenstein versus Crookshanks.
That's right. That's right. And the tournament would determine a challenger for the winner of Crookshanks versus Frankenstein.
Plus, we never got our Cruiserweight Championships.
What happened there?
They just didn't do one. They never announced one. But who were... It would be Cyclops and... I close my notes. I forget. Vampire Lady? I forget now. Cyclops versus somebody would be the other one. But
I can't imagine them making another one of these films, though.
Bullshit.
I think it's done.
They must. I demand Monster Brawl 2.
How about Shark Brawl?
Put a shark in there. A shark can be one of the combatants. Put him in the creatures division.
All right,
Giant
everybody.
shark.
That's your movie review for the day. Monster Brawl. It's on Netflix. All these films are on Netflix. So if you've got Netflix and there's a movie we got to see, then drop me a line, Brian at WrestlingObserver.com. That's BRYAN at WrestlingObserver.com. Or send me a tweet at Brian Alvarez on Twitter. And we'll see what we got next week.